My sister kept surprise, dropping her kids off at my apartment for years. I have never wanted children. That is not something I whisper or soften, depending on the audience. It is not a phase, not a grudge against the world, not a fear of responsibility. It is simply a truth about me. I am 32 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that smells faintly like burnt toasts no matter what time of day it is. And my life is built around quiet routines. I wake up early. I go to work. I come home. I cook simple meals. I read. I sleep. I like that rhythm. I protect that rhythm. My sister Andrea has never understood that. Andrea is my only sibling. She's 3 years older than me and has 2 children. Lily, who is 6, and Noah, who is 4. Their father is technically in the picture. You can point to him and say he is there, but he does not do much. Our parents are supportive, but they retired in another state and only visit a couple times a year. Andrea has always been the loudest presence in any room, the kind of person who makes decisions first and explains them later, if she explains them at all. The first time she surprise dropped the kids at my place, it felt like an accident. She called me from my parking lot and said she was in a bind. She had an interview. It was last minute, but important. Could I just take the kids for 2 hours? She was already outside. I remember looking at my clock, calculating my plans, and telling myself that being an uncle meant stepping up sometimes. I buzzed her in. 2 hours turned into 5. The second time, there was no interview. It was a birthday dinner for a friend. She promised she had tried every other option. She showed up with backpacks and a plastic grocery bag of snacks, kissed the kids on their heads, and left before I fully processed what was happening. After that, it became a pattern. Sometimes she would text 10 minutes before arriving. Sometimes she would call from downstairs. Twice, she did not warn me at all, and simply knocked on my door with both children already bundled in coats. Every time, it was an emergency. A shift someone had called out from, a flat tire that somehow required hours to resolve, and once it was a school meeting that could not be missed. I wanted to believe her, because believing her meant this was temporary, and not deliberate. Andrea did not see me as her brother, with his own life. She saw me as unused space. She saw my evenings as empty simply because they did not involve children. I tried setting boundaries. I told her she needed to ask ahead of time. I told her I could not keep rearranging my schedule, and that I was not equipped to care for 2 young kids on short notice. She would nod and agree and promise it would not happen again. But it always happened again. The worst part was that Lily and Noah were good kids. They were not the problem. Lily liked to sit cross-legged on my living room floor and draw quiet pictures of houses with enormous windows. Noah would line up my shoes in a careful row near the door and ask me which pair was for running and which pair was for serious walking. They trusted me. They were comfortable in my space in a way that felt undeserved. That made it harder to be angry. The night everything finally broke was a Thursday. I remember that because Thursdays are the one night I allow myself to order takeout. It is a small ritual I built after a rough year at work. I had just gotten home, loosened my tie, and set my phone on the kitchen counter when someone knocked on my door. It was not a tentative knock. It was quick and urgent. I opened the door, and Andrea was already halfway down the hallway. Lily stood there holding her backpack with both hands, and Noah had one shoe untied and a smear of something sticky across his sleeve. There was a large overnight bag at their feet. I stepped into the hallway and called after Andrea, but she did not turn around. She lifted her hand in a wave without looking back and said she would call me later. I stared at the overnight bag before pulling the kids inside, before my neighbor across the hall could open his door and witness the scene. Lily walked in quietly, like she had done it 100 times. Noah asked if I still had the cereal with the cartoon tiger on it. I closed the door and checked my phone. No text. No explanation. I called Andrea, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A slow, heavy feeling started in my chest. This was not the usual 2-hour emergency. This felt different. The overnight bag felt deliberate in a way that chilled me. I sat the kids at my kitchen table and poured them water while I tried Andrea again. Still nothing. I sent a message asking what was going on and how long she would be gone. No response. Lily told me her mum had said they were having a sleepover adventure with Uncle Charlie. She said it in a rehearsed tone, like it was a line she had practiced. That was when the anger started to sharpen. Andrea had not been panicked when she knocked. She had not been flustered or apologetic. She had been brisk. She had planned this. I checked social media, something I rarely do. Andrea had posted a picture 20 minutes earlier. She was dressed up, smiling into the camera with a caption about finally taking a break and choosing herself. I stared at the timestamp. She had planned to leave them with me before she even got to my building. The realization settled over me slowly. This was not about an emergency. This was about convenience. She had decided she deserved a night out. And had decided I would absorb the consequences without discussion. I looked at Lily and Noah sitting at my table, swinging their legs. They were innocent in all of this. That was what made it unbearable. I fed them. I found spare toothbrushes, still in their packaging from a travel kit. I set up blankets on my couch and laid my spare pillow on the floor. My apartment is small enough that I could hear every rustle, every whisper, every small cough dot. At 11 that night, Andrea still had not answered. At midnight, her phone was off. Every scenario ran through my mind that night. What if she did not come back in the morning? What if this was the beginning of something bigger? She had joked before about how much easier my life was. She had once said, half laughing, that maybe the kids would benefit from more stability. At the time, I thought it was a comment born from exhaustion. Now, it felt like a warning. When morning came, Andrea still had not called. I made pancakes. Because it was the only breakfast I knew how to make, that felt special enough to distract 2 children from the confusion of being dropped off without explanation. Lily asked when her mum was picking them up. I told her soon. I did not know if that was true. At 9 in the morning, I received a single text. Busy. I'll get them Sunday. It was Friday. I read the message 3 times to make sure I was not misunderstanding it. She had left them for 3 days without asking. That was the worst offense yet. Not because it was longer. Not even because she had not warned me. It was because she had assumed I would simply accept it. She had decided that my consent was unnecessary. And something inside me finally stopped bending. I did not respond to Andrea's text right away. If I had, I would have said something I could not take back. I would have written a paragraph fueled by anger and disbelief, and she would have brushed it aside the way she always did. Andrea had a talent for minimizing other people's reactions. If I told her she crossed a line, she would tell me I was overreacting. If I said I felt taken advantage of, she would remind me that family helps family. But family is not supposed to feel like a trap. I spent Friday in a haze. I called out of work because there was no other option. My manager was not pleased. I had already used personal days earlier in the year, and my explanation felt thin even as I said it. I told him there had been a sudden childcare issue in the family. He paused long enough for me to imagine him recalculating my reliability. I watched my professional stability wobble because Andrea wanted a weekend. Lily and Noah treated it like a vacation. They built a fort out of my couch cushions and asked if they could watch cartoons. I do not have cable, so I set them up with a streaming service and tried to answer emails from my phone while sitting on the floor beside them. My apartment, which once felt orderly and controlled, now felt crowded and unpredictable. Around noon, I texted Andrea again. Sunday is not acceptable. We need to talk. She responded an hour later with a laughing emoji and a message that said, "Relax. They love you." There was no acknowledgement of the fact that she had not asked. No apology. No concern about my job or my plans. Just the assumption that affection erased responsibility. By Friday evening, I understood something I had resisted admitting for years. This was not about emergencies spiraling out of control. This was about escalation. Each time I allowed it, she pushed further. 2 hours became 5, an evening became a night became a weekend. What came after a weekend? Saturday morning arrived with no word from Andrea. I checked her social media again, despite knowing it would only make me angrier. She had posted pictures from a rooftop bar downtown. She looked carefree. There was a caption about rediscovering herself. I stared at the skyline behind her and tried to reconcile that image with the reality of her children eating cereal at my kitchen table. Lily asked again when her mum was coming. This time her voice held a tremor she was trying to hide. Noah became clingier, following me from room to room. Children understand more than adults realize. By Saturday afternoon, my phone battery had dipped into the red from constant checking. I plugged it in and sat at my small dining table while the kids napped on the couch. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, I thought. About all the previous times Andrea had done this, the concert she forgot to mention until she was already in line, the weekend trip with a friend that turned into 2 nights because she lost track of time, the afternoon she claimed she had a dentist appointment and later posted pictures from a spa. Each incident had been wrapped in plausible excuses. Each one had required me to stretch a little further. I realized then that my silence had trained. Perai had never followed through on consequences. I had never refused outright once the kids were physically in my doorway. I had told myself I was protecting them from instability. But in doing so, I had allowed Andrea to create more of it. When she finally called late Saturday night, her voice was bright. She asked how the kids were. She told me she needed this break. She said she had been overwhelmed and I, of all people, should understand stress. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked a single question. What was your plan if I wasn't home? There was a pause on the other end of the line. She laughed lightly and said I was always home. That answer said everything. I told her she needed to come get her children immediately. Her tone shifted. She said I was being dramatic. She said she had already paid for another night at her hotel. She said I was ruining something important for her mental health. I looked at the 2 small figures asleep under my blanket and felt something in me hardened into clarity. I am not your backup plan, I told her. There was silence, then irritation. She said I was making her feel guilty. She said I had no idea how hard single motherhood was. She said I was lucky to have freedom. As if my life was an empty waiting room. The conversation ended without resolution. She said she would come Sunday afternoon as planned. Sunday morning arrived grey and heavy. Lily had stopped asking when her mum was coming. That worried me more than the questions had. Noah spilled juice on my rug and burst into tears, apologizing. over and over as if he expected punishment. I knelt down and cleaned it up while assuring him it was fine. But inside, it was not fine. At 3 in the afternoon, Andrea still had not arrived. At 4, she texted that she was running late. At 6, she said traffic was bad. At 7:30, she finally knocked. She breezed in like nothing had happened. She hugged the kids, commented on how tired they looked, and began gathering their things. I stood near the door and watched her move through my apartment like she had not disrupted it. When she finally looked at me, there was annoyance in her expression. She asked why I seemed upset. That question was the final insult. The worst offense was not just the unannounced drop-off. It was the complete refusal to acknowledge the cost. My missed work, my lost sleep, and the emotional confusion for her children. Not to mention my repeated requests for notice that had been ignored. I told her this could not happen again, but she just rolled her eyes. She said I was being rigid. She said family does not need formal scheduling. She said if I loved her kids, I would not make this difficult. That was the moment I understood that love had been weaponized. As she walked out of my apartment, with Lily and Noah trailing behind her, I felt a shift inside myself that was quiet but permanent. Because I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if she ever tried this again, I would not open the door. For 3 weeks after that weekend, Andrea did not attempt another surprise drop-off. She texted occasionally. The messages were short and neutral, as if we had both agreed to pretend nothing significant had happened. She sent photos of Lily holding up a spelling test with a gold star. She sent a video of Noah riding his scooter in circles. I responded politely, but I did not offer to see them, and she did not ask. But Andrea has never tolerated boundaries for long. On the 4th Friday, after the sleepover adventure, I came home to find my hallway light flickering. The building maintenance had been ignoring that issue for months. I remember noticing it because it made everything look unstable, like the walls were vibrating. Then I saw the overnight bag. It was sitting directly in front of my apartment door. Lily was seated beside it with her back against the wall. Noah was standing a few feet away, pressing every button on the elevator panel and watching them light up. Andrea was nowhere in sight. My chest went tight in a way that felt almost mechanical. I looked down the hallway. I checked the stairwell door. Nothing. I stepped toward Lily and asked where her mum was. She said you knew, Lily replied. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched in the straps of her backpack. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Andrea had not even attempted to warn me this time. The hallway camera, which our landlord had installed after a package theft, blinked red in the corner. She had left her children outside my door, in a shared hallway, and walked away. That was no longer frustrating. That was reckless. I ushered the kids inside because leaving them out there was not an option. Once the door closed behind us, I called Andrea immediately. Her phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I did not leave a message. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. You left them in the hallway. Call me now. No response. Within minutes, my anger shifted into something colder and clearer. Lily asked if they were staying the whole weekend again. Noah wandered into my bedroom and started touching things I usually keep neatly arranged. The normalcy of their behavior made the situation feel even more surreal. Andrea finally texted 45 minutes later. Emergency. Can't talk. Back Sunday night. It was Friday. Again. But this time, there was no explanation. No attempt at charm. Just an instruction. Just an instruction. I stared at the message and felt something inside me settle into place. She had moved from manipulation to abandonment. I called her one. Last time Bud Herfin was off, I walked into my living room and looked at Lily and Noah. They were pulling blankets off my couch, preparing their fort without even asking. They had learned the pattern. I fed them dinner, I kept my voice steady, and I let them watch a movie. But inside, my thoughts were sharp and focused in a way they had never been before. This was not about inconvenience anymore. This was about safety. And if Andrea believed she could leave her children in a hallway and disappear without consequences, then she had finally crossed a line that even I could not ignore. Saturday morning arrived with no word from Andrea. I did not check social media this time. I did not want to see smiling photos from a brunch table or a caption about self. I did not want another reminder that she viewed motherhood as something she could clock out of whenever she felt like it. Instead, I looked around my apartment at the evidence of her decision. Crumbs in my couch cushions. Small socks near my bathroom. SINK. Crayon marks on a notepad I used for work. These were not disasters. They were ordinary traces of children. But they were there because Andrea had chosen not to be. I thought about the hallway, about the flickering light and the fact that anyone in the building could have approached them before I got home. The risk she had taken was not theoretical. It was immediate. By Saturday afternoon, my phone remained silent. I sent one final message. If you are not here by tonight, I am making a different decision. No response. I cooked pasta, helped Lily with her reading homework from a worksheet she had brought, and tied Noah's shoes 3 separate times. The day felt long and heavy, like it was waiting for something to snap. At 9 that night, Andrea still had not come. I sat at my kitchen table after the kids were asleep and stared at the blank wall in front of me. For years, I had absorbed her behavior because confronting it felt messy and extreme. I had told myself she was overwhelmed. I had told myself the kids benefited from stability. But stability built on silence is not real stability. Andrea had escalated because nothing had ever stopped her before. And for the first time, I understood that if I opened the door to this pattern again, it would not just be weekends. It would be weeks, or maybe longer. I stood up from the table with a sense of clarity that felt almost calm. I looked at my phone. There was still nothing. Sunday morning arrived without a single message from Andrea. I woke up early, not because the kids made noise, but because I had barely slept. The apartment was quiet in that heavy way it gets before the sun fully rises. Lily and Noah were still curled up under the blankets in the living room, their small bodies tangled together in a way that made them look younger than they were. I stood in my kitchen and made coffee while staring at my phone on the counter. There were no missed calls, no explanations, and no apology. The longer I looked at the screen, the clearer everything became. Andrea was not in danger. She was not stranded. She was not incapacitated. She was choosing not to answer. I thought about the hallway again. About the camera in the corner. About the fact that she had left them outside my door without confirming I was even home. If I had worked late that night, they would have been sitting there alone for hours. I had spent years minimizing her behavior because it was easier than escalating it. But there was no minimizing this. This was not irresponsible in a vague way. It was reckless in a very specific, measurable way. At 9 in the morning, I sent her one final message. You have until noon to pick up your children. I did not add anything else. No explanation, no threats, no emotion. Noon came and went. At 12:15, I locked my apartment door behind me, with Lily and Noah standing on either side of me. Lily held my hand. Noah clutched his backpack. I walked down the hallway, past the flickering light, and toward my car with a calm that felt almost detached. I drove to Andrea's apartment. Her car was not in the parking lot, but I knocked anyway. No answer. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the door, before turning around and walking back to my car. The next step was the one I had avoided for years, because it felt drastic. Because it felt like betrayal. Because it felt like crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. But Andrea had crossed it first. I drove to the nearest police station. I did not dramatize anything when I walked inside. I simply explained that my sister had left her 2 children in my apartment hallway without notice and had not returned for them after more than 48 hours. I showed them the messages and the times. I explained that this was not an isolated incident, but that this time she had physically abandoned them. Outside my door, an officer asked me if I felt the children were in danger. I thought about the hallway as I said yes. What happened next unfolded in a steady, procedural way. A report was taken. A call was placed. Attempts were made to reach Andrea through official channels rather than my increasingly ignored phone calls. It took less than an hour for her to respond when it was not me calling. She showed up at the station just after 2 in the afternoon. Her expression when she saw me sitting there was a mix of shock and anger. She looked less composed than she had in her rooftop bar photos. Her hair was pulled back hastily. Her mascara was smudged. She demanded to know why I was making a scene. I did not raise my voice. I simply repeated what had happened. I described the hallway. I described the lack of communication, and I described the pattern. For the first time, there were consequences she could not brush aside with a joke or a dismissive comment. The officers asked her direct questions. They asked why she had left her children unattended. They asked why she had not responded to repeated attempts to contact her. They asked what her childcare plan was. She did not have one. Watching her attempt to explain herself without being able to minimize the situation was surreal. For years, she had relied on emotional pressure and family loyalty to avoid accountability. In that room, those tools did not work. An official warning was issued. A report was filed, and the phrase child endangerment was used in a way that made the air feel thinner. Andrea's anger shifted into something closer to panic. She looked at me like I had betrayed her, but I had not been the one who left 2 small children in a hallway. When everything was documented and the immediate crisis was addressed, Andrea was told clearly that any repeat incident would trigger a deeper investigation. There would be no more informal misunderstandings. More assumptions? She left the station with Lily and Noah that afternoon without looking at me. I watched them walk to her car. Lily glanced back once. I lifted my hand in a small wave, and then they were gone. The fallout was immediate. Andrea called me that evening, her voice sharp and furious. She accused me of humiliating her and overreacting. She said I had put her at risk of losing her children. I listened without interrupting. When she finally paused, I told her something I had never said clearly before. I will not open my door again without prior agreement. If you leave them outside, I will make the same call. There was no anger in my voice. Just certainty. For once, she did not argue. The weeks that followed were tense and quiet. Andrea stopped sending casual messages. She stopped assuming. When she needed childcare, she asked in advance. If I said no, she found another solution. It turned out she had options she had simply not wanted to use. Their father began taking the kids on scheduled weekends. A neighbor from her building started babysitting occasionally, and Andrea adjusted her work shifts. The world did not collapse because I stopped absorbing her emergencies. In fact, something unexpected happened. Andrea changed. Not overnight, but slowly, the pattern shifted. She no longer framed her time away from her children as something she deserved at any cost. She became more structured. The official report had forced her to confront a version of herself she did not like. And for the first time, she understood that I was not an extension of her convenience. Months passed without another surprise knock. When I did see Lily and Noah, it was because we had planned it. They came over on a Saturday afternoon once a month. We made pancakes, or built forts, or walked to the park. The time felt intentional, instead of imposed. The tension between Andrea and me softened into something cautious but functional. We were not as close as we had once been, but we were clearer. Looking back, I understand something I did not grasp before. My silence had never protected the kids. It had only protected Andrea from the discomfort of facing her own behavior. The most frustrating part of the entire ordeal was how long it took me to act. I had allowed the pattern to grow because confronting it felt extreme. But the real extremity was letting it continue unchecked. The night she left them in the hallway was the worst offense. It was reckless, humiliating, and dangerous. But it was also the moment everything finally shifted. Andrea learned that family is not the same as free labor, and I learned that boundaries are not cruelty. And Lily and Noah learned, perhaps without realizing it, that the adults in their lives would not simply ignore what felt wrong. My apartment is quiet again most evenings. The hallway light still flickers, though maintenance finally says they are replacing it soon. Sometimes, when I unlock my door, I remember the sight of that overnight bag sitting outside it. And I feel a faint echo of the anger I carried that weekend. But I also feel something else: relief.